So the Senate is expected to vote on a bill this week to fund the government.
Yeah, the Senate Appropriations Committee released text of the package last night. It includes President Trump's offer to extend protections for DACA recipients for 3 years. And in exchange, he would get the $5.7 billion he wants for a border wall. That alone had Democrats calling the deal a non-starter before it was even written. But it also adds $12.7 billion for natural disaster relief. This is something Democrats have pushed for. So could that sweeten the deal here?
Well, let's ask that question, among others, to NPR national political correspondent Mara Liasson. Hi, Mara.
Hi, David.
All right, so tell us more about what's in this bill that the Senate's going to be taking a vote on.
Well, the bill has disaster relief in it, as you said, as a sweetener. And the big question is, could this proposal of the president's that will be on the Senate floor bring us any closer to the end of the shutdown? And it could. I don't think it's the final deal, but the president is now talking the language of compromise. He's come off the notion that the wall has to be 2,000 miles long. He's added relief for the dreamers, young people brought here sometimes illegally by their parents. This is not the final deal. Democrats would need more. Trump has not said how much less money for the wall he's willing to take than $5.7 billion. But the first step is to see if this can get 60 votes on the Senate floor. Democrats say it can't, but then they'll have to keep talking.
Will they have to keep talking? I mean, so far, Democrats have basically said to the president, we're not going to talk, at least publicly saying we're not going to talk until you open the government. But you think this is a window? I mean, Democrats are going to be forced to actually start negotiating and get into some of the nitty gritty here.
Yes, I do. I think that usually in the past, when we've had these standoffs, there's a mechanism where the government is reopened week by week. They have to keep on voting while they keep on talking. Vice President Pence said on television yesterday this wasn't a final offer. He said the legislative process is a negotiation. That sounded so normal. But I do think you're going to hear more from Democrats about their vision of border security. If the argument is about border security, the president wins. If it's about a wall, the Democrats win. And I think that they are going to start talking more about their vision of what they want on the border.
Mark, can I ask you more about what the president was offering on the DACA protection for 3 years? Because, I mean, most Republicans have been standing by him through this and supporting this deal. But some of his supporters are calling that DACA offer amnesty. Could that hurt him with part of his base?
Well, that's always the big question. I think right now Republicans in Congress are pretty united behind him. And yes, the Ann Coulters of the world, radio talk show hosts, are calling this amnesty. But Republicans in Congress want the government open because they're being blamed for this shutdown so far more than Democrats are. Republicans I've talked to say that Trump's hold on his base is firm enough that he probably could get some relief for the dreamers in here. The big question is, could he go all the way to a path to citizenship, which is going to be hard since that's been defined as amnesty by the vice president? Where is the sweet spot? How much less money could he get for the wall, and how much deportation relief would he have to offer for the dreamers?
Many questions to answer as we go forward and as that partial government shutdown for now continues. NPR's Mara Liasson. Thank you, Mara.
Thank you.
All right, let's talk more about this shutdown. More than 50,000 TSA employees have been working without pay since the partial government shutdown began over a month ago now.
Yeah, and they're getting help from some unusual corners. Members of the band Kiss have been offering them free food at airport locations of their restaurant, which is called Rock and Brews. Here's Kiss band member Paul Stanley in a Facebook video.
While the TSA continues to work on our behalf without pay, we want to make sure that we can at least provide them with a delicious meal to show our support.
But more and more TSA workers are actually just calling out sick altogether, as many as a tenth this past Sunday. TSA released a statement saying that many of those employees said they can't get to work because of financial limitations.
All right, let's talk to NPR's David Shaper in Chicago. He's been covering this. Hi there, David.
Good morning.
So it's amazing. As I've been going through airports and going through security lines, it seems like every passenger says to a TSA employee, like, thank you for working without pay. And it sounds like it's now getting to a point where more and more are having to call out sick. What are they telling you about this decision?
Well, as you guys just said, they're not actually saying, I'm sick, I can't come in. They're really not able to go in because of the financial limitations. Working without pay for a TSA employee is a difficult thing because they're among the lowest paid federal government employees. They make about $35,000 to $43,000 a year on average. That's about $17 to $20 an hour. So a lot of them live just paycheck to paycheck or do just a little bit better than that. And so while the vast majority are still working their shifts, more and more of them are saying they've got to go do something else to make a little more cash. They've got to put food on the table, so they're going to pick up work elsewhere, working odd jobs, waiting tables, whatever they can find, or they'll stay home with the kids so a spouse can pick up extra shifts, or so they just don't have that extra expense of childcare during the day.
So a lot of hard decisions. Obviously, the shutdown clearly disrupting life for them, their families. What impact is this or could this have on travel and airports if this goes on?
Well, at this point, we're not seeing, flights canceled, flight delays, and people missing flights. But we are starting to see more and more airports closing security checkpoints because of a shortage of screeners and lines getting longer at certain airports. There were a bunch of extra screeners added to airports in Atlanta, at LaGuardia in New York, at the Newark airport. There were long lines apparently over the weekend in New Orleans, at Baltimore Washington airport, because they had to close checkpoints. Houston's had some problems. It depends on the airport and how many employees in that particular area are calling in, but it hasn't just grown to that point yet of where we're going to see canceled flights and huge disruptions to air travel.
Is it just airport security employees, or are there other employees at airports who were impacted by the shutdown?
No, actually, the FAA has thousands of inspectors, technicians, and safety specialists who inspect the planes, who do everything from licensing pilots to making sure that the air traffic control equipment is working properly. And they are working without pay. A lot of them weren't actually considered safety critical and essential employees when the shutdown began, but a lot of them got called back to work last week and are on the job now, but they're going to have the same sort of financial troubles soon if they have to keep working and keep doing these important jobs without pay. And that's where the ripple effect could come, where air travel could be affected.
NPR's David Shaper talking to us from Chicago. David, thanks.
My pleasure.
All right, now we want to talk about the political turmoil in Venezuela and what's looking like an uncertain future for that country's leader.
Yeah, officers in the National Guard in Venezuela basically went rogue and posted a video on social media early Monday morning.
Pueblo, salgan, apóyennos.
So in this video, they are calling people to the streets to support their uprising against the president, Nicolas Maduro. The attempt is the latest in a whole string of calls to remove Maduro from power. The Venezuelan president was sworn into his second term earlier this month. But many, including the United States, have called Maduro's government illegitimate. He faces an opposition-run Congress that is calling for the military to turn against him.
And NPR's Philip Reeves is in Caracas covering all of this. And Phil, start if you can by telling us exactly what unfolded here yesterday.
Well, it's not entirely clear. The authorities say that in the early hours, a group of National Guardsmen in Caracas took a police captain hostage, traveled across town in several military trucks, kidnapped 4 more officers, raided an outpost, stole a bunch of weapons, and then were captured after some sort of confrontation. Just before that video was posted online calling on people to abandon Maduro, and other videos appeared too. And now the government says that 27 guardsmen have been arrested and will face what they describe as the full weight of the law.
Well, talk to me about the broader political situation here, because while this was members of the National Guard, some officers who turned against him, Maduro is focusing his criticism on Congress, saying Congress is trying to destabilize the country. What exactly is he talking about?
Yeah, Congress, or the National Assembly as it's called here, is opposition controlled, and it's long been opposed to Maduro and the ruling Socialist Party. In fact, Maduro and the party have stripped it of all its powers. But now it's launching a new drive to oust him, arguing that his second term, which has just begun, is illegitimate because it was the result of a fraudulent election. And in this, the National Assembly has the support of the US and dozens of other countries who are also stepping up pressure right now on Maduro. And the National Assembly also has a new young leader. He's 35, Juan Guaido, and he has said that he's willing to be an interim president for a transitional period leading to new elections if the public supports that, and crucially, if the military supports that.
Phil, I mean, we've talked about with you how hard it has been for people in Venezuela. This country has been through so much economic turmoil of late. I mean, how shaky is this political moment? Could Maduro lose his grip on power, and could there be a real period of chaos and uncertainty going forward?
Well, the country is in terrible shape. But remember, Maduro still controls the Supreme Court. He still appears to have the support of the top military command. And he still has the all-powerful legislature that he created last year, the Constituent Assembly, which is packed with his supporters. He still has that at his disposal. But things do appear to be moving. The opposition's call for a nationwide day of protest on Wednesday. They're expecting a big turnout. We'll have to see, but there's a lot of buzz about it online.
NPR's Philip Reeves this morning in Caracas, Venezuela. Phil, thank you.
You're most welcome.
Big news here around LA. Students attending school in Los Angeles today will find something different. Teachers in the classrooms.
A 6-day teacher strike is over. The educators were demanding better pay, smaller class sizes, and other changes. Support for this deal was overwhelming, although different teachers see different implications for them. NPR asked a few what they thought.
I am actually pretty excited about our new tentative agreement.
Feeling a little uneasy. And not fully satisfied with the agreement.
We are going to have smaller class sizes. That's big.
For my class setting, the number of students actually increased.
But I'm excited moving forward to see what else we can accomplish as a collective.
Those are teachers Jennifer Libby-Zelazny, Teresa Rivas-Nasokiki, and Jacina Chavez.
All right. Kyle Stokes is the education reporter for member station KPCC and joins me here in our studios at NPR West. Kyle, good morning. You've been covering a 6-day strike, and it's over.
Oh, boy. I'm tired.
I bet you are. Well, so it sounds like from those voices that there's still a lot of questions, but there is a deal. Teachers are going to get back to the classroom. What is in the deal? What are the details here?
Well, so the deal includes a raise for teachers. That wasn't a big question. They had been looking for a 6.5% raise, but it looked like they were going to accept the 6% raise the district has been offering for months. It also looks like the teachers are going to get the hiring of new staff, of nurses, of counselors, and school librarians that they had been asking for. For instance, the union says that the district will hire enough nurses now to guarantee a nurse in every school 5 days a week, which is something that not a lot of schools have right now. Coming up in just a few years is when that's going to be in place. The big breakthrough, David, though, was on class sizes. The district agreed to try and hit some very ambitious targets for reducing class sizes here in Los Angeles schools, but they're going to do it over 3.5 years instead of the kind of 1-year window that they had been trying to hit before. The other piece of the class size deal is that the school district gave up the power that it had in the old contract to essentially raise class sizes almost whenever they want, because class size reduction is very expensive, and the district felt like they needed this flexibility in order to save money in the event of a fiscal crisis. The district gave that up, and the union found that old provision very toxic. They find that concession to be a huge one.
All right, a lot more nurses, guarantees of smaller class sizes. These things cost money. The district had been saying they don't have the money. Did they come up with more money? What happened?
Well, so part of this is still being costed out. It's still not entirely clear how much the entire deal is going to spend, and that's going to be calculated over the next couple of days. But on the class size and staffing pieces, part of the way that the district is going to pay for it is by spreading this out over 3.5 years. Again, instead of that 1-year window we had been talking about before. But what also appears to be happening, David, is that the district is taking what Mayor Eric Garcetti called the leap of faith, that the funding is going to materialize somewhere, that either the state is going to come in down the road with more funding, that maybe local voters are going to raise their own property taxes. It is that leap of faith that seems to be what's going to move forward here, and that's going to be the way that the district is going to make this work, is what it appears.
It feels like a big moment of coming together. Is that what teachers and others involved are saying to you, or is there still some sort of uncertainty?
A big moment of coming together, yeah. There's a lot of relief, certainly among parents, that this deal is done.
Sure.
Teachers obviously feeling very empowered, like they got a lot done with this deal, and some actually, a minority apparently, felt like they maybe could have gotten more. But we saw overwhelming majorities vote in favor of this tentative agreement and look like they're ready to accept it.
All right, strike over in Los Angeles, although teachers in Denver are planning to strike beginning on Monday, so we're going to have to keep our eyes on that. Kyle Stokes from member station KPCC covers education here. Kyle, thanks.
You're welcome.
This week, the Senate will vote on 2 bills to end the partial government shutdown.
That's right, 2 bills. One of them is backed by Republicans. The other is backed by Democrats. What the bills have in common is that neither is expected to actually pass. Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell spoke for the Republican option.
The proposal outlined by President Trump is the only one currently before us that can be signed by the president and immediately reopen the government.
Democratic leader Chuck Schumer said that bill has no chance.
The president's proposal is one-sided, harshly partisan, and was made in bad faith.
Okay, now Democrats then have backed the same measure that passed the Senate by unanimous consent back in December, a bill that has no funding for a border wall. That one died after President Trump said he wouldn't sign.
NPR White House correspondent Tamara Keith is following this story. Tamara, good morning.
Good morning.
How are these bills different other than one having border wall funding, and the other not?
Well, that's the big one. But the other difference is really one is simply a clean bill to fund the government for a short period of time. It would basically, the Democrat bill basically reopens the government for a couple of weeks to allow negotiations to continue. President Trump's bill, the Republican bill, is based on the remarks that the president delivered over the weekend. It includes wall funding, other border security funds. It also would have a temporary extension for the DACA program for young people known as Dreamers, as well as some other extensions for other immigrant groups. And it makes some pretty significant changes to the way the asylum works. And that Democrats say is a poison pill that is built into that measure.
That is one of the parts that Chuck Schumer would refer to as being bad faith. So does voting on these 2 bills, neither of which seems likely to get 60 votes and pass, advance the process in any way?
Well, sometimes taking votes that fail proves what can pass and what can't pass, and then they can move on. So in that sense, it might advance things. I mean, at least they're voting on something, right? Which they haven't done much of on the Senate side, or any of on the Senate side, as long as this shutdown has been going on. But does it resolve the underlying problem? No, the underlying problem is that President Trump doesn't want to end the shutdown that he said he would be proud to own until he has funding for a border wall. And Democrats say they don't want to start negotiating over a border wall until the government is reopened.
Are lawmakers or the White House feeling increasing pressure?
I think that they are. The pain is growing from the shutdown as it continues. Admiral Carl Schultz, the commandant of the U.S. Coast Guard, posted a video last night on Twitter. He says, "We're 5+ weeks into this government lapse, and your anxiety and your non-pay. You, as members of the armed forces, should not be expected to shoulder this burden."
I find it unacceptable that Coast Guard men and women have to rely on food pantries and donations to get through day-to-day life as service members.
And then he made sure that they knew about assistance that's available. That is not a good look.
No, hearing a commandant say that this is an unacceptable situation. Tamara, thanks so much.
You're welcome.
That is NPR's Tamara Keith. Now, the shutdown is also affecting the Federal Bureau of Investigation.
Yeah, Thomas O'Connor is the president of the FBI Agents Association. He says that the shutdown is making it more difficult for the agency to do its job, to protect the people of the country from criminals and terrorists. It sounds like the shutdown is affecting a lot of important operations at the agency, including going after terrorists, drug traffickers, also gangs.
NPR Justice reporter Ryan Lucas is here to tell us more. He's in our studios in Washington. Ryan, good morning.
Good morning.
So how is it that this shutdown affects the FBI?
Well, according to the FBI Agents Association, the impact of the partial shutdown is pretty significant on them. The association represents around 14,000 active and retired FBI special agents, so they have representation, members in all of the field offices across the country. And the group released a report yesterday that outlines how this lack of funding is hindering the FBI's work. It's based off of anonymous comments from members.
Mm-hmm.
And They say that it's having an impact on everything from training to operations and investigations. And the kinds of investigations that are taking a hit are serious. We're talking about sex trafficking, crimes against children, counterterrorism, cybersecurity, violent gangs, drug traffickers, everything. The Agents Association also says that this may have a long-term impact on the FBI, on its ability to recruit and retain the kind of talent that it needs to do its job.
Oh, sure, because it's embarrassing to have people not paid. But I want to understand this a little better. I presume that a lot of FBI agents are considered essential personnel. They're not being paid, but they're told to show up to work, meaning they can investigate things, but they're sending word they're unable to investigate even though they're on the job. Why would that be?
Well, one thing that stands out in this report again and again is agents saying that they no longer have the money to pay confidential sources who are critical to their investigations.
So who are not necessarily willing to wait to the end of the shutdown to get paid, I suppose.
When sources aren't getting paid, sources can dry up. Sources can go silent. And these sorts of sources are used in a lot of the work that the FBI does. Stuff that I mentioned earlier, the counterterrorism cases, counterintelligence, gang, drugs. One example from the report comes from an agent who says that they're investigating a street gang that's pushing a lot of methamphetamine and heroin. And the agent says that their probe has been undermined because they don't have money to pay their confidential sources, and they also don't have money to make controlled purchases of drugs, which is something that they often use in narcotics investigations. Now,
I'm just imagining an undercover officer having to stand there and say, listen, I can pay you for this. I just need to wait a couple weeks or maybe a little longer. No, go on. I'm sorry.
Now, you also have to remember that the FBI doesn't work on its own. It can't do all of what it needs to do in order to carry out investigation on its own. It works closely with state and local law enforcement. The Agents Association says that in some cases that sort of cooperation has been hampered because they can't pay those partners for work on their joint investigations. And they also say that grand jury subpoenas are being delayed because there are no funds for them and staff at U.S. attorneys' offices are furloughed.
How are unpaid agents personally affected?
It's really hurting them, according to the FBI Agents Association. There are even food banks that have been set up at some of the field offices to try to help people make ends meet.
Okay, Ryan, thanks so much. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
That's NPR's Ryan Lucas.
President Trump conceded a small defeat with words that were, for him, fairly measured.
He said he would delay the State of the Union speech. Days ago, you will recall, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi said she would, quote, suggest that he delay it because of the partial government shutdown or else submit the speech in writing. In a rambling letter yesterday, the president said he would do that speech anyway. Pelosi then wrote him again, saying he was disinvited. And on Twitter last night, the president said that is her prerogative. He said no other room besides the House chamber will do, so he will not try to find some alternate venue. Amid this exchange of messages, protesters stood outside Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell's office. They're chanting, "We need a paycheck." The Senate does plan to vote on two bills that would fund the government today, although both are expected to fail.
NPR lead political editor Domenico Montanaro is with us this morning. Hey, Domenico.
Good morning, Rachel.
So President Trump, as we know, not someone who backs down easily, but I guess he didn't really have a choice, right? If Nancy Pelosi said he is not invited to her house.
Well, he's always got a choice, but like you said, that he's not somebody who's really known to back down. He's known to escalate rather than take the temperature down. But he did tweet out that he would do the address when the shutdown was over. He said, "I'm not looking for an alternative venue because there is no venue that can compete with the history, tradition, and importance of the House chamber," and said he looks forward to doing it in the, quote, near future. No sign on when. But it's a remarkable moment. And, look, the politics of this, there's a confluence of polling that's been out that's shown his numbers getting worse and worse during this shutdown.
Right. So does that mean, because his poll numbers are dropping, is the president bearing the bulk of the political cost of the shutdown?
So far, he absolutely is. There were 3 polls that were out yesterday from the Associated Press, from CBS News, and from Fox, by the way, an outlet that the president watches a lot but does good polling. And all of them showed more people blaming the president argument for the shutdown than Democrats. And the Fox poll, for example, found that 3/4 of people found that the shutdown was more of a problem than the border. And those are numbers that he has to be seeing. In the AP poll, his approval rating was just at 34%, which is really a low for him in that poll, down 8 points from a month earlier, and really doing very badly with independents, 69% disapproving of the job he's doing.
Meanwhile, federal workers are expected to miss their second paycheck tomorrow. I mean, people are really suffering in this moment. There is political pressure on both sides. The Senate's got these two bills that they're going to bring up. They're both expected to fail. So where is the opening to end this?
Well, the president has said so far that he's not budging on a wall. Democrats say they have a reason for not caving either. Take a listen to what House Speaker Nancy Pelosi said about that yesterday.
There is serious and justified concern that this president would shut down the government anytime he does not get his way legislatively. That is why we must hold the line.
And that's a line that you've heard from Democrats all day yesterday. So Democrats, like she said, want to hold the line. The Senate is going to vote this afternoon on these two proposals. One on the president's proposal for the $5.7 billion for a wall for temporary immigrant protections. That's expected to fail. And one from Democrats to simply open the government for a few weeks to negotiate. That's also expected to fail. But a little bit of news here. NPR's Susan Davis reports that Democrats are prepared to make a counterproposal to the president that would spend a significant amount of money on the border, but not on a wall. And we'll see if Republicans blink.
Okay, NPR's Domenico Montanaro. Thanks, Domenico. We appreciate it.
You're so welcome.
All right, so question. What do actual voters across America think of the shutdown?
Past shutdowns have not always had much effect on elections. Republicans shut down the government in 2013 over Obamacare, for example. It was a very unpopular shutdown, but they still won the Senate in 2014. In 2019, though, the shutdown has gone on much longer.
All right, NPR's Don Gagne has been in Ohio this week, getting reaction from voters about the standoff. Don, good morning.
Good morning.
Where are you?
I'm in Chillicothe. It's about an hour south of Columbus. This is a red part of the state, not deep red, but red. And in Chillicothe, there are precincts that vote Democratic as well. But when you talk to people here, the first thing you notice is that the partisan divide holds. So Democrats I talk to say this thing is all on Trump. Period. He owns it, that he's chosen a very unpopular path on the shutdown and that polls back that up. And they complain that Trump's demand for funding of the wall leaves just no room to negotiate. Talk to Republicans. It gets a little more interesting. They're still with Trump, many as much as ever. But it's more complicated, and some will wonder, what the president's plan is here.
What more do they tell you, those Republican voters? I mean, when they say it's more complicated, what does that mean?
Well, let's meet a few of them. Greg Rouse, I talked to him downtown yesterday. He's a government worker, but he works for the county. So he is working, but he says he knows people on furlough. He is a bit confused about Trump's strategy to double down on the border wall after Republicans lost control of the House.
I'm a little bit frustrated, but I'm not sure towards him exactly. I'm still a strong Trump supporter.
So I also talked to Fran Burdette, who works in a law office in Chillicothe. She voted for Trump in 2016, but is quick to say, not enthusiastically, she does not like the way the president is handling these negotiations.
I truly believe that we do need a wall if you look at all the statistics, but I don't think this is the right way to do it. The thing that worries me the most is the people that are not getting paid, and these people that are living from paycheck to paycheck, especially like the Coast Guard and different places, people on food stamps, all that kind of stuff, they need help.
And I asked Burdette if she still supports Trump, and she said that she does. But then I said, can you look ahead to 2020 a bit for me? Will you be voting for him again? And she gave me a look, and she said it is way too early to think about whether she's going to do that. So she's, kind of wavering.
Yeah, interesting. I mean, you talked with a cross-section of people there. Are people really thinking about 2020, or are they more like her and saying, just give me some time?
They're certainly watching the debate in Washington over the wall very closely. 2020 has crept into their consciousness, whether they like it or not. And some are quick to say, "Hey, I voted for the president and I'm with him again." But again, there is an awareness that a choice is coming up and it's going to be on them before they know it.
And that the shutdown is playing into their calculus, at least a little
bit? Absolutely.
Okay, NPR national political correspondent Don Gagné. Thanks, Don.
A pleasure.
So there are two people claiming to be the president of Venezuela right now. And as you'd imagine, there's all kinds of chaos as a result.
Nicolas Maduro was reelected president, but the socialist government that's been in power for many, many years has been accused of rigging elections and also changing the rules when they lose. And the leader of the legislature, Juan Guaidó, has declared himself the interim president.
Del Ejecutivo Nacional, como el presidente encargado de Venezuela.
He's saying that he's the national executive in charge of Venezuela. He was speaking to a massive crowd in the capital, Caracas, yesterday. The United States, Canada, and much of Latin America have formally recognized him as Venezuela's leader. Now, Maduro, the other leader, responded by expelling U.S. diplomats, but the U.S. has said they will not leave because the legitimate president did not ask them to go.
All right, NPR's Philip Reeves is in Caracas covering all this. Phil, one country, two presidents. What is happening right now? What are people telling you?
Well, what's going on is a major crisis with serious international implications. I want to step back just a second because this is kind of complicated. Venezuela's opposition refuses to recognize Maduro as president because they say his re-election for a second term, which just began recently, was fraudulent. And a lot of people agree with that. So Juan Guaidó has declared himself interim president, as you heard. Now, he's head of the National Assembly. That's Venezuela's Congress. He says he'll be transitional leader until new, free and fair elections can be held. He's done that with the full support of the US and most of Latin America and Canada. And they say he's the president, not Maduro, yet Maduro is in the presidential palace. And he says this is an attempted coup led by Washington, who wants Venezuela's oil and gas. And he's portraying it as a throwback to the Cold War and another installment in the US's history of supporting coups and other forms of intervention in Latin America.
I mean, where are the people in this moment, Phil? Does Maduro have any actual grassroots support still?
He does. It's often said he enjoys the support of about 20% of the country. I have no idea how reliable that figure is, but he does have supporters, and they were out on the streets yesterday, summoned there by the ruling Socialist Party, holding counter demonstrations in answer to the day of national protests called by the opposition.
Are these U.S. diplomats actually going to leave? I mean, the U.S. doesn't recognize Maduro, so Maduro kicked the U.S. diplomats out. What's happening there?
Yeah, this has become a really critical issue. Secretary Mike Pompeo says Maduro doesn't have the legal authority to break diplomatic relations with the U.S. because the U.S. doesn't recognize him as president. It therefore follows the U.S. thinks that Maduro doesn't have the legal authority to throw out its diplomats. But what happens if they don't leave? Maduro controls the streets here, and he controls the security forces so far. And I honestly don't know the answer to that question.
In just a couple seconds, do you think new elections will be held?
Very difficult to say at this point. We're really at the beginning of this crisis, and no one really knows how it's going to play out.
Phil, thank you so much. Philip Reeves from Caracas reporting on the political crisis there.
Members of the Senate sometimes like to refer to themselves as the world's greatest deliberative body.
In modern times, the speeches in the Senate debate draw limited attention, but Senator Michael Bennet was an exception yesterday. The Colorado Democrat is usually a pretty reserved guy, but yesterday, the Senate failed to advance two plans to end a partial government shutdown, and Bennet wasn't having it.
How ludicrous it is that this government is shut down over a promise the President of the United States couldn't keep, and that America is not interested in having him keep.
Republicans, for their part, reportedly lashed out at Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell over the impasse at a private lunch.
So what now? NPR White House correspondent Tamara Keith is here. Tamara, good morning.
Good morning.
Have senators come up with anything that maybe could pass?
Well, not necessarily, but they're talking. And that's the thing. There were these 2 test votes yesterday, and they failed. But taking a test that fails, it has a purpose, and it really kickstarted conversations. I think part of why it kickstarted conversations is that 6 Senate Republicans crossed party lines and voted in favor of the Democratic bill to reopen the government and fund the government without funding a wall.
Which is the big dividing line here, the president's demand for funding for a wall on the Mexican border. Okay.
Right. And so that prompted the majority leader, Mitch McConnell, and the minority leader, Chuck Schumer, to go huddle and talk about what was possible. And then they didn't really come up with anything fully, but they're talking, which is a new development.
Okay, and I guess they've talked about possibly a temporary reopening of the government while they negotiate. Of course, Democrats have demanded open the government first. We'll talk about the wall later. Republicans have largely, with the exceptions you mentioned, obeyed the president in the Senate and voted the way that he wants, only to have reopening of the government with wall funding. Would the president approve of some kind of temporary movement?
It's not 100% clear. He was asked about it yesterday. He said, McConnell and Schumer, they're working on something. Let's see what they come up with. But, maybe he said he might support it.
One of the ideas suggested is they open it, they pay a sort of a prorated down payment for the wall, which I think people will agree that you need.
So Senator Schumer's spokesman put out a statement after that saying Democrats are a hard no on the wall, prorated or otherwise. President Trump was asked, well, what if they come up with something that doesn't have wall funding in it? And the president was a little squishy on it and then said, I've got other options, too.
Which would be a reference, I suppose, to the possibility of declaring a state of emergency, which is something the White House has discussed but dismissed up to now. Exactly. The idea of a down payment on the wall would go against the Democratic position here. They've said they don't want to continuously have the president threatening to shut the government down to get things that he wants. Giving him a little bit of what he wants for a temporary reopening of the government would go against that position, wouldn't it?
Indeed, it would, which is why Democrats are not open to that idea.
Do you have any insight as to what the president is thinking now beyond what he has said in public?
Well, he had this meeting with conservatives earlier this week. They came away thinking that he was going to hold firm and that he wasn't going to fold. They said they're used to Republicans folding in shutdowns, but they feel like the president is pretty strong on wanting wall funding.
Okay, Tam, thanks for the update.
You're welcome.
NPR's Tamara Keith. Now, today, federal workers miss their second paycheck.
Right, and crucial programs to help Americans pay rent or buy food are actually running out of money at this point. On TV yesterday, U.S. Commerce Secretary Wilbur Ross said he was baffled by this. He said it should be simple for federal workers to take out loans. Ben Carson, the Secretary of Housing and Urban Development, told NPR's Braxton Booker, that's not so simple.
I mean, yes, I know we're going to give them back pay, but that doesn't take care of the interest if they borrow money. It doesn't make them whole again.
And NPR's Braxton Booker is in our studios. Braxton, good morning.
Good morning.
Where'd you run into Ben Carson?
So we were at an event in D.C. It was a late night event. He was out there talking with members of the homeless population. He was getting basic information about their health and about their general circumstances, about how they became homeless. And we were chatting in between these interviews that he was conducting. Mm-hmm. And Carson is typically low-key, doesn't get riled up about things, but you could tell he was getting very frustrated about how long the shutdown had lasted. And here's what he had to say.
We can continue to hope that our leaders will recognize that this is an easy problem to solve. Just take your ego out of it.
So there you hear him say, our leaders, and take your ego out of it. So, at first glance, I was like, well, does he mean Nancy Pelosi? Does he mean Senator Mitch McConnell? And does he mean President Trump? And I checked with the staff, and they insist that he was only talking about congressional leaders.
Oh, okay. Although when you think about ego, there is a person who comes to mind. What are the secretary's concerns as this shutdown goes on? What makes it so bothersome to him?
Well, he certainly got the federal workforce on his mind, including many of his staff at HUD, who are, again, missing their second paychecks today. There is another concern, though, that obviously HUD provides rental assistance to many millions of low-income Americans. So his real concern, too, are evictions. Now, Carson pointed out that, no tenant has ever been evicted as a result of a shutdown, but then again, no shutdown has ever lasted this long.
Okay. Aren't there safety net programs here that are going to run out if this goes like another month or so?
Well, it looks like a lot of programs, including housing choice voucher programs and project-based programs that HUD organizes. There's food stamps, SNAP benefits that is run out of USDA. Most of these programs are it appears to be, they're going to be running out of money by mid-February, certainly by early March, and that is giving a lot of concern to a lot of Americans.
I'm thinking if you're a tenant, it's going to be stressful not to be able to pay your rent and embarrassing not to be able to pay your rent, but you probably won't be evicted right away. The person who really ends up short there is the landlord.
Right, and the landlord, I talked to one landlord who does have Section 8 housing. Her name is Jennifer McQuarrie. Here's what she had to say.
No, I'm not a tenant in jeopardy of losing my home. However, I am a landlord in jeopardy of losing everything.
Everything?
Everything. I mean, she owns 10 properties, all of them with Section 8 housing vouchers. And she says if she misses one payment, she is very close to losing it all. And she's hoping to not have to evict anybody. But, times are tough right now.
Oh, because she borrowed money to own the buildings, and
right.
Some people have really strict terms on those loans.
And she's also, yes, she has mortgages to pay, and she's expecting money from HUD to supplement the mortgage there.
Bracton, thanks for the update. Really appreciate it.
Absolutely.
That's NPR's Bracton Booker. Some other news now. How is a crisis in Venezuela evolving?
Some, but not all, Americans are moving out of harm's way. The State Department ordered non-emergency U.S. government employees to leave Venezuela. But key personnel remain in defiance of an order from Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro. The U.S. says it's not going to follow the president's demand to evacuate because the U.S. recognizes not President Maduro, but instead the opposition leader Juan Guaido as his replacement.
Reporter John Otis has been following the situation closely. He joins us now. Hi there, John.
Hey, Steve.
How is each rival president moving to consolidate power?
Well, it's a pretty bizarre situation. Maduro claims, that he's the legitimate president because he took power through an election that was held last year.
Mm-hmm.
But that election, most international observers say it was a sham, that he basically stole the election. Nonetheless, he was sworn in for another 6-year term just this month, and that's kind of what set off all these protests. Juan Guaido is Venezuela's the head of the Congress, and under the Constitution, if there's a vacancy in the presidency, the head of Congress takes over, and that's his claim to legitimacy. He wants to lead a transitional government and hold new elections, and he's been recognized by the U.S. and most Latin American countries. But for now, Maduro would seem to have the upper hand because he counts on the backing of Venezuela's powerful military. So, it's kind of a situation where Maduro has lots of power but not much legitimacy, and Guaido has a lot of legitimacy but no real power.
You said Maduro counts on the backing of the military. Is it clear that he has it and will continue to have it?
Well, Steve, the military is sort of a black box. You never really know what's going on, but on the surface, his support would appear to be holding. Yesterday, Defense Minister Vladimir Padrino came out and said the armed forces continues to recognize Maduro as Venezuela's only legitimate president.
Reconocemos como legítimo presidente de la República Bolivariana de Venezuela.
Now, Steve, one reason for this support is that Maduro's given officers a lot of perks. He's put them in charge of government ministries and even the vital oil industry. Also, some top officers have been accused of drug trafficking and human rights abuses. And so they fear that if the opposition and if Guaido actually take power, that they could go to jail or be extradited.
Oh, so they've got money on the line and their own futures on the line, and yet they must understand the instability of the situation. And this is a military that once produced Hugo Chavez, the guy who established the socialist government, didn't it?
That's correct, Steve. and the military, they've been involved in a lot of rebellions over the years, and there are a lot of disgruntled officers, and there have been a lot of coup plots. But at the same time, Cuban intelligence agents are working very closely with the top brass in Venezuela to snuff out any conspiracy. So that's why all the rebellions that we have seen have all been quite small. You may remember that attack on Maduro last year. It wasn't carried out by Army battalions. It was carried out by a couple of drones.
Okay. John Otis, thanks for the update. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Steve.
That's reporter John Otis, who is based in South America, has been following the situation in Venezuela.